Hello, Steve here, and welcome to another episode of Read Me Something You Love, where I invite someone I like to read me something they love. We then chat, and I also read them something that I love. And if my guest is a writer, we finish the episode with them reading a piece of their own work that excites or interests me. It's a 3-course literary love fest, you might say. And this week we're cooking up a storm. I have the poet Amaan Hyder, who has just published a fantastic collection with pen in the margins called At Hajj, and you'll be hearing a poem from the collection at the end of the episode. But we're kicking off with a poem that Amaan loves from the multi-talented painter, poet, novelist Shani Mootoo, a poem from her collection, The Predicament of Awe, and that one's called Recognition. After listening and talking about the poem, we'll be diving into Kaveh Akbar's wild and heady ocean, looking together at a poem of his called Do You Speak Persian? And then for dessert, Amaan will be reading his poem Clot. Links to all the poems are in the program notes of the episode on readmesomethingyouLove.com. Hope you enjoy listening and reading along with us.
A recognition. "You're Trinidadian," I blurt out proudly, smugly. Accusation not, of course, intended. I recognise the accent. Mine suddenly dips deep, curves like a kite, thickens like sugar browning in oil for stew. Our paths would likely not have crossed back there, so why is it I throw myself upon her over here? Before I have time to ask, so where you come from? What's your name? Who's your mother? Where's your father? She has turned, but I hear her say, I am Canadian. The reply dropped flat, mercilessly terse. These are things I know. Anonymity, autonomy, freedom to self-define, to forget, to come out, to escape. Sometimes there is something I understand, no room to negotiate.
Thank you. So, the poem seems to start with a kind of a bid for connection, right? One person meets another person, and it's that bid for connection. It's sort of saying, "Hey, we have something in common," which I suppose is also what poems do as well, right? That first line of a poem is a bit like a bid for connection.
Right.
It's like sort of saying, hey, maybe we have something in common. What was your sense of, I suppose, the beginning of the poem? Where do you find yourself in the beginning of the poem?
I guess what's interesting to me is probably the very first line, "You're Trinidadian," just that instant assumed recognition that is what's so interesting and what really caught me. And also those adverbs, proudly, smugly. Mm-hmm. I think the poem is probably, rather than just a recognition, it's a series of recognitions of different kinds. And so just after the speaker has said, "You're Trinidadian," there's almost like a sort of an instant realization, or maybe this is with hindsight, she's saying proudly, smugly. There are all these associations that we make whenever we talk, whenever we hear someone's accent. And these are the associations perhaps she has with her accent, or that she might read into her accent. Yeah. And it's sort of the language opening up, isn't it? The language, curves like a kite. It's moving. It's sort of dizzy. That's what's really interesting. Even though she's just said, "You're Trinidadian," I recognise the accent. So much is going on in those lines. The language is really opening out, and it's bringing in all of her own perceptions and other people's perceptions into the conversation as well, which I find so interesting.
When she says, "Our paths would likely not have crossed back there, so why is it I throw myself upon her over here?" Why do you think their paths might not have crossed, these two people?
Well, the speaker is recognising the other person because she recognises that they're a fellow Trinidadian.
Yeah.
But if you were in Trinidad, everyone around you would be Trinidadian, so that wouldn't be something you even need to mention. For example, we're both English and I don't need to tell you, oh, you've got an English accent, for example, something like that.
And yet this is interesting because you say we're both English, but because I wasn't born here, I again, that sort of brings us into the same realm as this poem. Because when you say, oh, well, we're both English, I'm like, well, I'm kind of semi-English.
Right.
I actually don't know how to identify, I don't know completely how to identify myself in terms of that kind of marker, because I don't fully identify with being English. You perhaps do. I mean, do you feel that you identify with being English in the way that maybe this speaker identifies with being Trinidadian?
I guess I would say so, yes. Just because I was born here and I grew up here.
I was also wondering if nationality is, of course, just one identity marker, and I was kind of thinking, okay, well, what are the other things that give us a sense of identity? So you've got nationality, class, race, gender, sexuality, cultural affiliations, and I was wondering if perhaps maybe nationality is maybe the only thing that perhaps connects these two people, that in sense of some of those other markers, they don't have, there isn't really a kind of a crossover, and she recognises that.
What's interesting, sort of jumping off from your question, is I was trying to think about why is the other person replied by saying I am Canadian, and I was looking for clues in the poem as to why that's the case, and I guess that's quite it's not entirely clear why she has replied in that way. We get the lines, the reply dropped flat, mercilessly terse, and mercilessly is quite there's sort of quite an emphasis on that, just in the way it sits in the poem.
Well, that's how she Shani, if it is Shani, or the speaker of the poem, that's how she receives that line, right? Because we don't know how it was said.
No,
true. I'm a Canadian, but she receives it, I guess, as a kind of a rejection, because she's made the bid for connection.
Right.
And when we make a bid for connection, we're hoping the other person's going to go, yeah, me too. Da, 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 da. And in fact, what she's got back is, no, I'm not going to welcome that particular bid.
I think also when we talk about connection and recognition, there's an assumed familiarity as well, that by saying you're Trinidadian, maybe she expects that we have things in common. And the reply goes, I'm Canadian, might also be saying, no, we don't have anything in common.
Yeah.
But not now at least.
But is that a wrongful assumption, to think that we have things in common because we're both Trinidadian? I mean, if we were both Trinidadian, I would make assumptions that we had things in common too. If you were South African, because that's where I grew up, I would make assumptions that we had certain things in common.
Sure, yeah. No, I don't think it's a sort of unreasonable thing to say. And I think what's interesting is what she comes on to later on in the poem. It's like the last couple of lines are almost a reflection on what's happened, when she says, these are things I know, freedom to self-define.
Yeah, let's look at that, because that's so key to the poem, isn't it?
this kind of, it's a kind of a shift in a way, because the first 3/4 of the poem she's talking about and kind of she's presenting the situation, and then suddenly the poem shifts into a slightly different place where she goes, these are the things I know: anonymity, autonomy, freedom to self-define, to forget, to come out, to escape. Sometimes there is something I understand, no room to negotiate. What do you make of those lines? And of that shift? Because there's a tonal shift there.
It is. It sort of breaks away from the exchange, and then it's a reflection back on the exchange. And
why is she telling us these are things I know?
She's trying to understand the reason for, I think, for me, she's trying to understand the reasons as to why the person she was speaking to replied in that way. And she's, I don't know, it seems like something else is being brought in. You have the line, why is it I throw myself upon her over here? There's a kind of recognition of the reasons as to why someone might reject a recognition, a sense of familiarity, the freedom to self-define, and so she goes through the reasons that she has for the explanation as to why the person has replied, I'm Canadian. And also it's sort of a very, what's so interesting in the reading for me in those last lines, those last two verses where, as you've described, there is that shift, is this attempt to understand, this attempt to sort of see things, where she says, the last line of the poem, no room to negotiate, like as if perhaps there hasn't been the space for this person to negotiate between various different things, being Trinidadian, being Canadian. Perhaps there's just a desire to escape being Trinidadian, just to forget it for whatever reason, which isn't revealed to us in the poem, which we could guess at, but the poem sort of gives none of that away. And so there's a sort of there's a recognition of that, a recognition of understanding. Yes, I understand that you didn't want to you didn't want to recognize being Trinidadian. You didn't want to bring sort of, I don't know, mention it or use it to define yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and in that bit to understand, it also feels deeply empathic, right? Which again is quite a hard thing to do when we're in a kind of rejected, wounded place, because she's in a somewhat rejected, wounded place, right? Because she's made the bid for connection. It's been an unwelcome bid. She's been cut off,
right.
And you know, where do we normally go from there? We normally go to anger, dismissal, whatever. But what she's done is a deeply humane. It feels like a deeply humane thing, which is going, okay, well, why is this person being what feels to me mercilessly terse? You know, maybe she, as you say, maybe she doesn't have the space to hold these, to hold kind of that dialectic, that at times we have to be quite binary, particularly if we're in quite a threatened place. What the poem seems to be saying is that it's really quite unsafe to perhaps be both, to be either or, to be non-binary, essentially. That we're kind of forced to be binary because the environment is an unsafe one.
That's so interesting. To be honest, I never thought of this idea of safety, and I see it. I see it now when you mention it. I guess too the word, I'm looking at the word freedom to self-define, I feel that's so important in her understanding of it. She's understood that this person might not necessarily because they had no room, but also because they just didn't want to recognise Trinidadian as themselves. So there is that as well, that kind of freedom of, well, now I'm just Canadian. That's
kind of like whatever works for you. That's your right too, in terms of how you want to identify, right?
Yeah.
Far be it from me to put this label on you.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to work out for ourselves what labels or categories we're relatively comfortable with.
Absolutely.
Why don't we move on to the next poem?
Sure.
Which I think might also, although it's a different poem, different poet, I think it might also continue some of this conversation. So this is a poem that I love and a poet that I love, and it's a poet by the name of Kaveh Akbar, who is well, I don't want to categorize him. I was going to say he's an American poet, as I suppose Shani would. I don't know, how would Shani identify? Would she identify, if she were here, as a Canadian poet? I mean, she was born in Dublin, I think, had a childhood in Trinidad, moved to Canada when she was 19. Who's to say?
I don't know.
So, anyway, Kaveh, you can Google him. I'm not gonna put him in a box. But he's a poet I love, and this is one of his poems that I think speaks about identity as well, and it's called "Do You Speak Persian?" So let me read it for us. Do you speak Persian? Some days we can see Venus in mid-afternoon. Then at night, stars, separated by billions of miles, light travelling years to die in the back of an eye. Is there a vocabulary for this? One to make dailiness amplify and not diminish wonder? I've been so careless with the words I already have. I don't remember how to say home in my first language, or lonely, or light. I remember only Delam barat tang shode, I miss you, and Shab b'chei, good night. How is school going, Kaveh Jun? Delam barat tang shode. Are you still drinking? Shab b'chei. For so long, every step I've taken has been from one tongue to another. To order the world, I need, you need, he, she, it needs. The rest left to a hungry jackal in the back of my brain. Right now, our moon looks like a pale cabbage rose. Delam barat tang shode. We are forever folding into the night. Shab b'chei. I don't know, as I was reading that, I felt quite tearful. I felt like I was going to start crying. It's quite a mournful poem. There's something about the tone of the poem.
It's very effective. It's he does something so brilliantly, which is at the beginning we're sort of out of the world in Venus in mid-afternoon, and we're going from the stars, and then we go back to, or we go down to sort of daily conversation, him remembering words, or trying to remember words. How is school going, Kaveh Jun? And that's sort of so wonderful. And I just love that image of the rest left to a hungry jackal in the back of my brain. I just love that, of sort of the jackal eating the words, or eating the images. It's just those transitions between those different things are just amazing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the jackal having eaten the words. I suppose it's also because this poem comes from his collection, Portrait of the Alcoholic, and because a lot of the poems in here are about addiction, I was kind of primed to read that hungry jackal as the jackal of addiction, and in terms of thinking also about those needs, right? Because he's talking about, I suppose, kind of core needs. To order the world, I need whatever I need. I need maybe home. I need light. I mean, maybe these are core needs, to go back to some of those words. And then I suppose my sense of it, that the hungry jackal was the jackal of addiction, that is perhaps, from my understanding of addiction anyway, a kind of a compensation for needs that have not been met in some way, or a kind of subduing of unmet needs. But I really like your reading of the jackal being the jackal of, I don't know, almost like dislocation that has erased most of his mother tongue, right?
Right. So if we go from the beginning of the poem, there's that line, is there vocabulary for this? One to make dailiness amplify and not diminish wonder. So he's thinking about language there, he's thinking about how to make the ordinary, the daily, sort of wonderful. I guess that's, in the other poems of his that I've read, that's always a sort of a very Kaveh Akbar thing. He's sort of bringing the wonder out of these sort of everyday moments.
I would call it a kind of a spiritual challenge that we all have, right? How do we make the daily magical? It's also a poetic challenge. How do we make the poetic line sing, which is made of everyday words? And as you say, he's so good at doing both. And it's sort of also connecting, I think, to that that almost kind of like that wounded human core.
It's interesting going from the Mootoo to this one. They're both very interested in language and what they can remember of what they've said, and then looking back on what they've said as well. That line, "I've been so careless with the words I already have." He's looking to sort of do a project with words, and then he's looking at the sort of the difficulty of words, the difficulty of remembering the language that he has. And then you have these wonderful sort of exchanges. How is school going?
Yes.
And then, "I miss you. Are you still drinking good night?" Those wonderful sort of juxtapositions.
There's, although, as I said, it's quite a mournful poem, and I think, they talk about certain chords being like sad chords. I mean, this is like A minor being like kind of a sad chord. I mean, to me, this is a poem in A minor. That line, "Are you still drinking?" and then the answer being "good night." I mean, for me, that's just a brilliant. It's just an incredibly witty line, because it's a sort of evasion, or it feels like an evasion. Like if somebody was saying, like a relative, "Are you, do you still have a bit of a problem with alcohol? Good night, I'm out of here." But also, what is drinking? What is drinking about? It's about bringing a kind of night over the senses, right? The senses being uncomfortable. Well, this is my sense of drinking. Speaking personally, not feeling comfortable with whatever, certain emotions, certain feelings, and so the numbing, the nightifying of those feelings. But it's funny. It's almost like this kind of one-liner that pops up. It's like an LOL moment in the middle of this quite plangent poem. What do you make of that last line? This fantastic the last two lines. We are forever folding into the night. Shab Bakhair.
I was thinking about that a lot, especially the word folding. Like, how can you fold into the night? What does that mean? I don't know. It sort of takes you back into the poem to look for clues again, to look for what it means. I don't know. He's constantly saying good night in the poem in Persian, so it's sort of folding away. I was thinking of folding into bed.
Yes.
And then you've got the links with love or with sex. And then also the stars, and seeing the stars at night dying in the back of an eye. Maybe you have the folding away there as well.
There's something comforting about folding, right? Like you kind of fold into bed, as you say, or something being folded up into. There's something almost embracing about it, but again, there's something kind of lost about it as well, right? You know, we're folded like there's a light that has travelled, literally light years for it to be seen by our perceiving eyes, dies as it arrives in the eye in which it's perceived.
When we get it, it's lost.
As soon as we get it, as soon as we see it, it's dead, and it's probably coming from a planet, from a star that's already probably died anyway.
Right. Like his language is gone.
And in this case, it's generated a fantastic poem. So let's move to your poem, which is The Clot, which comes from your fantastic first collection, first of many, let's hope, At Hajj. Would you be so kind as to read it?
Sure. The Clot. Alif. What is a fit? A holy thing is a fit. A life is a fit. I hear 50 machines stitching, inking a grip. Someone came to the door. Someone was listening to us. When I wake, I am told what happened. I pressed eject, moused my father. I pressed enough, moused my mother. She leaves in a car that shoots light. Lam. What is a fit? Someone trying to believe is a fit. A life is a fit. I'm sitting at the dining table. I don't know what the words mean, but I know the letters. This is Alif. This is Bear. This is the sword that shoots light. Yes, that's right, I nod. I can see my father in the hallway, signing the channel to be recorded. My father is a video forwarded. My mother is a video recorded over. Do you remember ejecting a tape, the ribbon crackling behind it? That's the currency, a snippet of preface notes. Someone making a face in belief is a fit. One country and then another is a fit. Meme. In America, there are Mayo and Baylor. There is a video of opinion meeting itself. They request you rewind as a courtesy. So I'm sitting at the dining table. I don't know what the words mean, but I know the letters. There is my father, interrogating after. There is my mother and what's going on behind our heads. There are the letters passing through my fingers. This is a house. This is an ox's head. This is Bear. This is Alif.
Thank you. There is narrative interwoven into this poem, but at the same time, there is, or it feels like there is, a mystery to the poem in some way, which I really like. And I wonder, when you read a poem like this at a reading, do you make any prefatory remarks? Do you set up the poem in any way, and what would you say if you were setting the poem up? Or do you, as you did there, just go into the poem and let the listener make of it what they will?
I've been doing the latter, so just going into the poem, reading it, letting the audience make of it what they will. I do absolutely recognise that it's a sort of enigmatic,
Yes.
and there seems to be a narrative of people reading at a table, and then a mother and father sort of present but sort of distant in a way, perhaps. And so that's the sort of scene, as it were.
What fascinates me about the poem, and there's a number of things that fascinate me, but the one thing is that, and this is also where some of the enigma lies for me, is that some of the key words, for example, one of the key words, of course, is in the title, Clot, and the word fit. Both of those words have potentially a very benign reading, as well as a more unsettling reading. So, for example, Clot, the benign reading of Clot is obviously, he's a bit of a clot, he's a bit of a plonk, he's a bit of an idiot. Boris Johnson comes to mind when I think of that, and I'm sure Boris Johnson, that's what he's aiming for when he's doing Boris Johnson. But then you have the unsettling meaning of this coagulated blood. Similarly for fit, things fitting together, appropriate, proper, etc. And then the unsettling meaning of this, convulsions, strong emotions, fit of anger. And for me, which is where the enigma lies, I'm still trying to work out what's going on in the poem. Is it benign, or is it unsettling, or is it both? It feels like a mix of the two.
Yeah, it is a mix of the two. So if I just point to the line about, I could see my father in the hallway signing the channel to be recorded. So this was a memory I have of, so the people in this poem are sitting at a table reading the Koran, so reading the Arabic letters. That's why you have Alif and Ba mentioned in the poem. So that was an idea I had, and I used to watch this cartoon, and I wanted my dad to record it because I would be sitting doing this lesson and this cartoon would be going. So in that way, the sort of fit is benign, the poem is benign in a way. But then when you mentioned one country and then another as a fit, this idea of the fit also being something difficult, moving countries, going from one understanding one history to another, and taking those things with you, the ribbon crackling behind the tape, just the difficulty of that. So I did want the connotation of the convulsion, or the fit in the sort of maybe the negative sense. So I sort of wanted them both in the poem.
There is some kind of separation occurring. There is something like, for example, maybe a divorce. I mean, this is the narrative I'm putting onto this poem. And the question is, how does one cope with that separation? What are the coping mechanisms that we have? Maybe some of those coping mechanisms are in reading, be it the Quran or be it other texts. Maybe they are in the comforts of watching the programs that we love. I don't know. Again, I don't really want you necessarily to go, oh yeah, that's what the poem is about.
Sure.
But I suppose after reading it a number of times, that's, for me, that's where it starts to, that's where some of the narrative starts to cohere around this sense of separation.
Yeah, I'd say the poem is definitely different threads coming together, different memories. So this idea of sitting at the table reading the letters, and not necessarily understanding not necessarily understanding what you're reading, being able to read the letters but not knowing what they mean, and then also being aware of a relationship going on in the background behind one's head, being aware of that, but not knowing the ins and outs of it. So I sort of in my mind, one of the first lines of the Quran, or one of the first parts of one of the surahs, is that God created man from a clot of blood. So this idea of, I wanted this poem to sit at the beginning because it was a kind of beginning. The clot is the beginning of something. What that something is, I don't know, it's the collection or whatever. But and I wanted to bring also in these other things, like, as I said, moving countries, and the feeling of that, and also the sense of not knowing. I wonder if it's sort of, this is coming out of what we talked about from the Kaveh Akbar or the Shani Mootoo. There's a strange things of moving between countries where, perhaps this is a very personal thing, but when my parents moved countries, as a child looking at them, I often sometimes felt that the authority that they had in their old country, they sort of are missing in this country. And so that authority having sort of been gone, and them having to make their own difficult decisions about a country they know nothing about, seeing that as a child was sort of worrying, and it caused them a lot of anxiety, which they still have. But then for me it's sort of, it makes me very anxious, but then it's also a fascinating thing that they're trying to negotiate these things as well, and very aware that the authority of their parents, of the generation older than them, is so far away.
Yes, that's so interesting that their disempowerment, right, in that way, has a knock-on effect, has a transgenerational knock-on effect in terms of trauma, for want of a better word, I think. Which is why, even though you didn't experience necessarily the move from one country to the next, that transgenerational trauma gets passed on to you, and gets passed on to me, because I kind of experience both. I experience both the move and also seeing parents in that position, kind of, sort of floundering. Well, we were all floundering. And that stays with you. And I think that's something also that connects the other two poems, that there is there is something about trauma that's working its way through, those poems.
And the idea of autonomy, I guess, I don't know now, maybe with my generation or whatever, it's sort of easy to think that getting away from your parents is a great thing. Everyone can't wait to do it and be free, etc. But for my parents, I don't know whether it's their generation or them, particularly just them as people, away from culture or anything like that, they always talked about their parents in an incredibly respectful way, and they didn't want to be away from them. And so this idea of being away, of being autonomous, is sort of fraught. I guess perhaps that comes out in the Mootoo poem as well, and maybe in the Akbar poem as well. This idea that you have the language, but then you don't know the words. So it's, I don't know, perhaps there's an anxiety which comes through in this poem as well, with the questions and attempting the answers. And so this was the poem that sort of came out of it.
Well, thank you for reading it to me. I think it's an absolutely fantastic poem, and it's a fantastic collection.
Thank you.
As well. So thank you for coming in and reading and talking about these three poems.
Oh no, thank you for having me. Yes, it's been lovely to talk to you.
I love the way the poems spoke to each other in that conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, please, could you do us a short but hopefully sweet review on iTunes? That would really help to publicize the podcast a little bit further. Also, in the next year, I'm involved in a fundraising project called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks, where I'm going to be learning, as the name suggests, 52 poems in 52 weeks, in order to raise some money for the Safe House Education College Fund in Kenya, which has been set up to help young Maasai girls escape from FGM and childhood marriage, as well as provide them with primary and secondary education. I'll be vlogging my progress on a YouTube channel called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks, and it would be great if you could subscribe to that if you like the sound of this. But even more so, a small or large donation, even a couple of bucks, to the sponsorship page, there'll be a link on the website, would be hugely appreciated. As you may have noticed, I don't run any ads on Read Me Something You Love or expect you to fund the production or web hosting costs of the podcast. I'm happy to cover all of that myself, but it would be so great if you could spare a few dollars for the Safe House Education College Fund. Thank you for that, and look forward to hanging out with you again soon. Bye.